Well, welcome to the latest episode of Enterprising Minds. Alex Pokorny, David Dougherty here. Alex recording remotely for the first time ever. Looking good in your little closet. So shout out to the YouTube version. If you haven't checked that out yet, we do have a video version of this. Go check that out and see our amazing backgrounds. So Alex, you had the main idea that we were going to talk about today, so I'll let you cue that up and we can start the discussion. Before that, though, another shout out to like, subscribe, share. That really does help us. And we do have in our descriptions an email address. You can send that any questions, comments, show ideas to us so that we can make the show better and address some of the things you might have questions on. So, Alex, your idea.
All right. So I figured it was about time to do a check-in with different AI tools. And this was kind of an interesting one because it is a set of questions that it should be able to answer. Basically, any AI common tool out there should be able to answer. So what I had was a set of 30 questions. And it went from, and there's basically country audience insights. So first one basically being like Austria versus Australia versus Belgium, Brazil, China, basically just kind of went down the list. And it had some basic stats data and then got into some more harder to find audience insight data. So that was the kind of the test. It was basically, it's like, okay, how far can it go? And can it actually give me all 30 answers, and like, can it give it to me in a format that's actually like useful, so I can just do next country, next country, next country, and just like have this thing actually be a audience insights researcher, like basically a basic marketing researcher, and could tell me, hey, if I've got budget, where should I put my budget? Should I put it in Brazil or should it be in Belgium, and stuff like that, and give me the data. Right. So the data points that I was requesting went from, like I said, easier to harder, but all are available online. So the easier data would be GDP, population, adult population, and then it got a little bit harder, like number of power plants, number of restaurants, number of medical schools. Easy one there actually is medical schools. That's an extremely easy number to find because basically those are public, they're accredited, they exist. I mean, they're very, very public kind of institutions. Power plants a lot harder, but typically there's some general stats about them. Sometimes those stats get a little dated. So it's also interesting to see like what number might the AI tool pick? Would it pick the 2017 number? Or would it pick something a little bit more recent? Or would it try to make an assumption based on country size or something like that and pick something entirely different? So that was kind of interesting one with that one. Restaurants is a more difficult figure to find. And then at the end of the 30, which I think this is actually was a interesting point, at the end of the 30 was also two easy questions. It was percentage of English speakers and percentage of Spanish speakers. And this is basically just from an ad copy translation perspective. But those two data points, you can get off of Wikipedia, you can get off the World Bank, you can get off the CIA fact book, you can get a million places. Those are basically population stat basic figures. Like those ones are easy to find. So I gave it a test. Started with Copilot, and this was a paid version, enterprise level of Copilot. Did a couple questions. They seemed okay. So then I asked, okay, let's see if it can handle all 30 at once. And it started pumping out answers for me. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. It did take 10 to 15 minutes each time to run. But okay, I got Belgium done. I got Brazil done. I got China done. Started getting through the data. And then it stopped. And it said, this topic is complete. Let's start a new conversation. And I couldn't do anything aside from click, hit a new conversation. So I was like, oh, weird. I mean, I got my prompt and my format and everything down. I thought we were doing good here. Okay, fine. Start a new one. And I got sent into a different model. Because I started asking the questions, it would only give me up to basically 3 answers at a time. It was always very verbose, and it always ended with an emoji, which this was just funny because I was like, remove the emoji. I was like, okay, no problem. Da, 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 da. And then there was like a smiley face sun emoji at the end of it. I was like, in your last response, is there an emoji? Yes. Sorry about that. We'll try this again. Da, 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 da. Smiley face sun emoji at the end again. I was like, oh my gosh, just get rid of this stupid emoji. Like, It's a very basic thing, but it definitely gave me this more casual response. It would not put it into a single row column format, which is what I wanted. So I could update an Excel sheet basically with all these countries running down the line. It wouldn't do 30. It would give me very, very short responses, and the response length was basically the same each time. So it was pretty obvious to see that sometimes it would give me 3, sometimes maybe 4 responses to my data points, but it was always very verbose, lots of sentences for each one, but it would always stick to the same length. So I looked into it a little bit to see if there is a credit system to try to figure out basically of what happened to my enterprise professional, model. Like, did I run out of credits or tokens? Like, what was the issue like there? There might be, but it didn't. There wasn't any documentation that basically said it would switch models on you. Like, it would drop you down, basically downgrade you to like this public model, which is like the one that you find on Copilot online, where you can say more precise or more casual or anything. I got that model suddenly when I shouldn't.
Interesting. Yeah, I know for me, when I've played around with Copilot, I've been really unimpressed. Like, the sales video, the announcement video that they had was awesome. It was like, I could save so much time. But then the devil's in the details, right? Like, the way you describe things, there's a couple of things that come to mind. One is, how did you prompt it? Like, specifically. Mm-hmm. Secondly, the memory that's allocated for the task at hand for the model is another thing that I've run into with my own experiments. And then with all of the Copilot pieces, it's like, yes, there's Copilot for Excel, there's Copilot for Word, there's Copilot for, but it's not a single Copilot like the brand name would make you think. It's Copilot for Word, it's Copilot, like they're individual things. So there's not that cross sharing that makes it really powerful. So yeah, they end up being smaller models to do specific tasks. Largely that, like, every time I've tried to use Copilot on an Excel sheet where I would gain the most value from it, it breaks.
Yeah.
Or it says, I have to convert this to a table, and then we can do stuff, and then it breaks. And then now my sheet looks like crap, and it's broken.
Yeah. Yep. Had the same experience in the last week. Basically, it was like, okay, Copilot can do this at least, and it was like, no, it cannot. Even after creating the table, even after doing whatever else, it's like, I can't do that. It's like, great.
Right. And I don't know if you had this experience too, but like the quote unquote help documents that they have, or like the webinar recordings or whatever, it's all like, summarize my emails. Tell me what tasks I didn't do. And it's like, okay, that's great. That helps me for like 15 minutes at the end of the week. What about the rest of the week?
Yeah. And I'll give a kind of a TLDR real quick here. Going through all of these different models, and I'll talk a little bit more about Perplexity, Gemini, ChatGPT, and kind of some of the differences that I saw. In short, these models are not ready. They're not ready for replacing an entry-level employee. They're not even ready to replace an intern. An intern would have picked up some of the basics that I was requesting and would have been able to learn from it, and would have been able to, their memory, of course, is far superior to the model's memory, right? Or the fact that we even say that is crazy, but these models are starting to have a memory to them, but they don't have an extensive one, and they're not able to really apply a lot of logic to those to really say, okay, you've been requesting this sort of information. Let me kind of keep going down this trail and kind of anticipating the output versus having it be very prompted, which that's another piece about it. The idea of prompt engineering, or being able to craft a well-stated prompt, basically means that we have a usability hurdle right now. The average individual off the street does not know specifics about how to write a prompt. And if they can't take it from their natural language, the layman natural language, to the good export and good result, that means there's still usability issues that are still need to be worked out too. So there is a lot of there's a lot there, but there's an interesting check-in. And one other funny thing, this was just I mentioned English speaking percentage and Spanish speaking percentage. So I did Belgium, Brazil, China, Austria, Australia, I think were on the list as well. The country list is random, but it had to do with a Google advertising policy list. So I was adding data to this policy list. Percentage of English speakers for Belgium was 58%. For Brazil was 58%. For China was 58%. Also, Belgium apparently has 2% of the population speak Spanish, and Brazil also 2%, and China also 2%. They also apparently all have the same number of medical schools, according to Copilot. 8. They all have 8, which I was amazed. Brazil, only 2% of Brazilians speak Spanish? Like, just obviously wrong data. Like, I can grab it off of Wikipedia, I can Google it, and I can grab that data. That is not a hard data point to find as language speakers, and to realize that maybe, just maybe, a larger percentage of people in Brazil speak Spanish than China.
Well, and so with my own experiments too, like I find, so for my own personal, I pay for Google Gemini. I had a personal Copilot one. I have canceled that because it just was not useful. And I do pay for ChatGPT to get that. Honestly, for like planning something, doing math, finding like quick hit information type things, Google Gemini is fantastic. For really complex things where I want to like explore an idea or have it do like step-by-step things or remember a whole lot of context, I go to GPT for that a lot. Now, I do have a free version of Anthropic. It's been a while since I've used it. They've recently done a bunch of updates to their models, so I really should get back and play with those. But for example, like one of the best use cases that I've discussed recently, I forget maybe I did on the podcast or not, but when Apple had their developers conference, right? I opened up the GPT on my phone and I just said, don't generate anything. I'm going to be watching this presentation. I'm going to give you my notes from this presentation. When I tell you I'm done, then we can start, working with what I've input. I said, okay, great. Let me know. So then I just would hit the voice thing to dictate thoughts as I'm watching it. And then would go through. And then as I was doing that, I realized, okay, a lot of the comments that I'm naturally coming up with are the way in which the information is being presented. So, I have an MBA in marketing communications, so that's sort of an obvious lens for me, right? And once it was like, oh, this is really interesting because you have Tim Cook surrounded by trees and grass with this really modern building. He's on the rooftop of the Apple Infinity Loop. But every single shot that they had, it was either a really modern architecture look or it was a lot of nature, which was in stark contrast to the sort of startup coffee shop vibe that OpenAI had when they did their show and tell for their, desktop version and whatever else. And then Google, they have an outdoor amphitheater, but it still looks like a really corporate
stage. Like AstroTurf. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very set up very intentionally.
Very visually stark differences, right?
Yeah.
OpenAI and Google also did live demonstrations and live presentations. Apple was all pre-recorded. So they were able to take advantage of that with a lot of like outlandish transitions, like their intro to it were the presenters jumping off of a plane and landing into the thing. Like, so it's just like over the top and a way different vibe, and much cooler than, the CEO walking on stage to a bunch of people clapping, which is totally on brand for them. So kudos for sticking to the brand, and doing that. But so I recognized that, okay, yeah, my intention initially was to write a blog on the latest event, right? The latest insights, whatever else. Once I had all of that in the memory, all my notes in the memory, I then said, here's the context. Here's who I usually talk to on the platforms I usually use. So blog posts, LinkedIn, targeting marketers at this level in their career who tend to like this, that, and the other. Also, check for spelling and grammar, take your time, because for whatever reason, telling it to slow down gives you a better result. And then I also said, take notice of the way in which I spoke my notes into, this conversation, to have the outputs be similar to my voice and the way in which I present things. Boom. That outline was so good for what I was trying to do. And that blog post is up on my website. I can put a link in. Now, the actual blog post is me. It's not the AI, it's me. But it gave me an outline of, here are the topics that you kind of went to along these marketing communication bends. Here are the specific notes that fall in line to that. I also uploaded all of the URLs related to the announcement. So, here's this source, here's that source, here's this source. It included those links in the outline.
Yeah,
so then all I had to do was jump into Word, hit dictate, boom. Now I have my blog post based on that outline, and I'm done. So when I was on the agency side, that would have been 2-3 days worth of work, like actually attending the event, taking notes, writing the blog, editing the blog. Now it's, an afternoon. But so long story long, the main thing there is like not only having the memory, but then with the prompts, specifically calling out who you're targeting, the purpose of what it is you're doing, and then what the expectations are, I find go a very long way to getting the proper result. Now, if you did that in Gemini, I don't know that it has the same memory capacity. I haven't tried it yet. Might be interesting to try out, but I find that Google starts just like, it'll say, great, yeah, I can do that. And then the output won't be what it says. Like it struggles a lot with tables, That
was my experience as well. And one funny thing is I was able to Google search for a lot of these different data points that I was searching for, these audience insights, and have a quick answer appear on the SERP that was accurate. And it was the data point that I needed. Right. I would check sources. I would go through alternative sources, different links and all the rest. But really, that little snapshot that it took at the very top of the search result page was what I wanted. If I asked Gemini, it wouldn't give me that data. So there's a very clear disconnect between those two systems, or at least the algorithms that basically are available to each other. Because I was able to do that for multiple countries, tested kind of out, and it was consistent that basically Gemini would come up with different figures than whatever the snapshot gave me. So the Perplexity one, this is just a funny one. I ended up getting into about a 45-minute argument with Perplexity.
Does that fall under arguing with yourself, or does that?
It's like, is it arguing with an idiot online, or is it like old man yelling at clouds, or is it just a waste of time? Because I'm sure it's a waste of time. But I was trying to get it to admit to basically it kept making mistakes. there was one, it was power plants, and it said the country had 10, and there's easy stats that show that it's over 150. And then the same country, it said that there was 30,000 restaurants, which you can find stats, and I even provided the source, and it wouldn't pull the data or look at it. There's like 1,600, not 30,000, 1,600. I mean, and it basically overinflated that number a lot, and the power plant number, it had decreased a lot. So it was wrong in basically two very different directions for this particular country. And I kept providing it results and sources and being like, look at this source. What is the data point? And he would even say things that were completely wrong. Or I would ask, what are the sources that you've been getting your data from? And he would give me a list of sources that typically were privacy policies from a bunch of different sites. And they were broken links. Almost every time it was a broken link. So I would even ask it, check that link, tell me where that data point appears. And it would say, oh, this is the data point. It's on the website. It's like, the page doesn't work. And it kept having going back and forth until it would finally say, yes, the page doesn't work. And my gosh, it was so frustrating because it would not admit fault and it would not correct itself. It would instead claim that its source was correct. It was like argumentative basically back when I pointed out that the data was wrong. Instead of most of the models would say, oh, sorry. And then it kind of like tries again. It has a very kind of apologetic response, but it's very quick to basically correct itself. This one was not at all. And the data out of Perplexity by far was the most wrong of any of these that basically gave me data back. It was astoundingly wrong basically across the entire board for just basic, simple stats and stuff like that too. It was,
wow.
That one was the most frustrating because I've had such good luck with Perplexity in the past when it was more around text and content creation. Perplexity was good. And this was a research project, a data-based research project with online available data. I mean, and like I said, most of these data points, you can Google it and you can find it pretty quick, or there's a lot of different data sources because it's basic demographics.
Right.
And it was astoundingly bad. And every model had also one other failure point, which I thought was interesting. Again, to the point of prompt engineering. If I gave it 30, it would give me the first 2 accurately. And then after that, it kind of shifted into a less accurate. And then eventually it said data not found, data not provided. Or it would give me the first 2, which was literally population and GDP. And then it would just say data not found for all the rest of them. If you switch up the order or you ask just a couple data points at a time, then you get a lot better data, a lot better results back. Not necessarily always, again, accurate or right, but it actually will give you data versus just not provided and saying just nothing.
Right.
And formatting is a giant pain. Trying to get stuff to actually recognize that it's a column, single row column. I can't tell you how many different ways I tried to explain that to different models. But ChatGPT got it immediately. Copilot got it with some effort. Gemini struggled, but eventually kind of got there. Perplexity had no idea and would basically refuse to do it. It just kept giving me like data points, and it was like, no, this is not a column. Oh my gosh. Seriously, it was such a frustrating experience to basically argue with a robot. Like, what a dumb waste of time. But in short, basically, each one of them took a long time to search. A long time to find data, and the data in the end, I basically had to delete the entire worksheet. So it was a waste of like 3.5 to 4 hours of work because I've tried all these different systems and I couldn't trust any of the data points in it, even if it did give me numbers. So nothing.
Well, and
nothing.
Yeah, and that's the thing that we mentioned, like when we first started talking about AI. One of the things that I was worried about. This is just a perfect example of what I said I was worried about, where like I trust that someone like you or someone like me that has a healthy skepticism of tech, while also wanting to be sort of an early adopter of it. We do the due diligence, we check it, we make sure that it's okay. But how many people are being assigned similar tasks and just saying, well, AI told me this was correct. So then now they're submitting that to, strategic plans. like that's the kind of thing that makes me nervous where, okay, do you need to have a fact checker on the team before you actually put the PowerPoint together? I mean, like that's the thing that gets concerning, and every business will have to deal with moving forward.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I tried to just a couple of days ago ChatGPT to try to give me some information I thought would have been easily available off of Google's privacy policy and data transfer consent data. And there's a couple of specific questions of what kind of data points are being transferred during this particular operation. ChatGPT very quickly gave me a list back, and it looked right. And I asked for a source, and it gave me this privacy policy. I went to the privacy policy, and most of that information was not found on there. If you search each individual one, Google each one, basically most of them were correct, but there was one still in the list that was wrong. And that one actually would have kind of made or break the argument that I was trying to make, as well as really jeopardize the legal aspect of how we were talking about data transfer policy. So it was a key element, and it was in a list. And one of them just happened, from my experience, caught my eye because I said, that one seems odd. Like, I don't think that's quite right. And I was able to remove that. But the rest of it was accurate. Mm-hmm. So it's that same concern of, like, if I just trusted it and quick sent it, I was running low on time, I'm just going to grab the list and shoot it in an email and send it. I would have messed things up. I mean, it would have been wrong.
Right.
So, yeah, it was just funny. This Old Marketing just had a episode, and they talked about a decline in marketing. And one of the theories that they had was basically at this time was that there's a concern that, should I hire a marketer, or will they basically just get replaced by AI, in a couple of years? What's the point?
Yeah.
And from what I can tell, no. Like, honestly, no. I mean, I have to rely still upon my experience, my knowledge.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot more to it. Of even, let's say I got my 30 points for all my countries or whatever else. Great. What are you going to do with that? You're going to package it up? How are you going to explain it? How are you going to communicate it? Who are you communicating it to? How are you going to make it useful for an organization? Just collecting a bunch of data is not useful for anybody. Right. Communicating that and making sure that it's useful is used. I mean, that's when basically it hits and actually makes a difference to the bottom line. Again, that takes experience. Again, that takes human effort and skills and knowledge of, personalities and politics and everything else.
Right.
So,
yeah, interesting.
It's not there yet.
There is a line of thinking too, where it's like, true differentiation in marketing or branding or, running a company. If you really distill it down, it truly is what you communicate and how you communicate it. Mostly how you communicate it. Yeah. And that's the thing that can't be replaced. The importance of brand and sticking to that brand, like we said with the Apple, like, it informs creative choices. It informs visuals. It informs the color your walls are, like
everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it is an interesting time. And I know there was a recent thing where I think Chevron was, some high up at Chevron said, we are seriously evaluating whether or not all of the Copilot licenses we've paid are worth it. They're $30 a month for however many people they bought them for. And, if all you're getting is email summaries or, calendar summaries, which I would bet like 70% of people, they're super stoked about that. I don't know that you could justify that volume of licenses.
There's also so many alternatives.
Much. Right.
It's funny. I was just on a call with an agency, and I had Teams going. There's a Teams call with recording, transcript, and then the AI summary basically being a part of that.
Right.
Recap. So Copilot is just kind of auto-installed as a part of that. And it's funny, so everybody starts joining the meeting, and one of the first people from the agency joins in, and it's an AI note-taking bot. And it was a couple minutes later before actually somebody from the agency joined. And I was like, oh, great. We've got two different AI recording tools going on in the same meeting. And it was both taking transcripts and making notes on this thing. Mm-hmm. And it was just showed like, there's alternatives, and you can run multiple. You could even try testing out some other ones too. If that's all you're using Copilot for, that's a pretty limited usage. And yeah, $30 a month, is it worth it? Like, are you actually getting that kind of value out of that? That's difficult to say.
Yeah. Well, and then, for the lawyers out there, the amount of things that you will have to go through for discovery now, since everything is transcribed and everything is, saved to some bad.
You just need a better AI bot to do the e-discovery now.
Which, as we've talked about, is so good at discovering.
And finding information and getting it wrong. Oh, that's the other one thing. I found Copilot, it still struggles with accents. Like, it can get American accent, and the transcript is pretty solid. French accents sometimes are okay, but man, you start picking other countries, and if someone has a strong accent, speaking English, but has a strong accent, completely understandable to anybody listening. Yeah. However, the transcript is wrong. I mean, it keeps going. You keep running through it, and it's like, that doesn't make any sense. That's an error. I don't think they meant that. And kind of, I tried to do a recap of a meeting that I didn't attend, and I was trying to go through it to the transcript, and eventually I was like, oh, forget it. I'll just watch the thing, because the transcript got pretty bad at times, and the information got pretty chopped up.
Yeah. Yeah. That's where Google, I think, has a little bit of a heads up because of how much, they've devoted to voice search and understanding voice,
right.
And that is the interesting thing too, is like, if you're not paying attention to all of the updates, which is really hard to do with all the AI companies, because every week it's multiple, but each one seems to be covering a different task or a different grouping of tasks. So it might make sense that you end up having multiple AI helpers to cover those different things. And this is where we've talked about, strategically, I think small businesses and creators have an upper hand compared to the enterprises, just because they're freer to switch, or just say, hey, you know what, I want to experiment, I'll pay the $20. Whereas on the enterprise, go to sourcing, beg, borrow, steal, get the proper PO, and then, okay, as an approved vendor, and you're like, all right, 6 months later, I can do the thing I wanted to do,
a year ago, and time had passed. Yep.
And now it doesn't seem important anymore, but I'll find a new thing. Like, yeah. So, as we go to wrap up, what have you found it to be useful for? I mean, we talked a lot about how it broke, or how it's not doing everything completely perfectly, but what are some of your takeaways on what it's good for?
I'm still back to my same analogy from over a year or two now, is basically blank page killer. That's what these tools are best at. Is basically, if you're doing content creation, early brainstorming, early outlines of presentations, that sort of information, it is pretty solid with basically giving you something good coming back of an idea, or, hey, ChatGPT, what are some signs of a really well-functioning and advanced SEO team? And it'll give you maybe 10 things, and you probably thought of 9 of them, but maybe you didn't think of the 10th one. And, it's starting to kind of feel your thoughts and kind of start to push you along that brainstorming path to maybe that mode of creativity to produce something. That kind of thing, it's definitely useful for. once we start getting into basically requesting data and having it be a data assistant or research assistant, there's a lot of struggles there, and the credibility becomes key. I mean, it's okay if I say 10 signs of advanced SEO team and you don't give me one. That's fine. That's okay. If I ask for data points and they're wrong, the data's trash. Like, it's just done. So not there yet, but I definitely see them moving in that direction, getting more intelligent about it. The memory aspect is becoming important. And Dave, I do have one quick question for you though. Yeah. The blog post that you wrote by basically speaking into it and then having it understand your tone of voice and then responding back, is it able to maintain that response for future blog posts? Like, will it remember how you spoke to it the one time? If you gave it another topic, would you still be able to get your tone back? With
ChatGPT, yeah, they've worked a lot on memory to go through old conversations, which is cool to be able to have the callback of, hey, go through our previous discussions and find this particular thing, or you can go create your own custom GPT and have those as training data as an example. So I've been playing around with a lot of that kind of blank page piece. Again, like, I think going through the activities that I do on a regular basis and then try to figure out where I can automate those, that's been where I've had the most success, because even if it's saving 4 or 5 clicks every single day across an entire work year, that ends up being a lot of time to be able to either have a cup of coffee or, think slightly deeper on the issues at hand. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, but I've been experimenting a lot with that prompting piece of it. Like, how much context am I giving it? My kind of pro tip for it, and I know you and I have talked about this, I forget if we've recorded it or not, but I'll just say it again. If you give it the context of who you're writing for, what audience are you trying to address, and some of the characteristics of that audience, like the persona piece that you should have if you're creating content or doing any kind of marketing. But then also telling it what you know, what you like. If you have examples of the writing style or previous things that you've tried to do to target those things, that extra information ends up becoming important for the outputs. And even just the way that you phrase things can end up impacting, the outputs. Again, this whole conversation just reminds me of when the search engines were first around. They spent so much time and effort to train people how to search, right? Like, we take that for granted now, but I mean, that was a thing.
Restaurants near me. Yeah,
absolutely.
Nobody talks that way, but everyone searches that way.
Right. And so now I feel like we're in the very same thing where it's we're learning to prompt while these companies are simultaneously attempting to figure out what do they mean when they give us a bad prompt. to like auto correct your prompt to then, give you the output you're expecting. So it's going to be interesting to see how this develops. I think we'll come back to these types of conversations quite a bit as we try to figure it out. And I would be very curious to, anybody that's listening, what have you tried? What have you run into recently? Is this a shared experience? Because I know, Alex and I have had these experiences quite a bit in testing these other options. Let us know. The contact information is in the description. Any of our social channels, reach out. I'm on those. I'm checking those out. So thank you for listening. I hope this was helpful, and we'll see you in the next episode of Enterprising Minds. Take care.